Karen Carpenter had the voice of an angel, but her real story was pure hell. Behind the sweet songs and innocent smile was a woman slowly dying. Her own mother refused to say, "I love you," even during therapy. Her husband called her "bag of bones" and stole her fortune. But the most shocking truth? She was taking 90 laxatives a day and poisoning her heart with a drug that would kill her. The world thought they knew Karen Carpenter. They had no idea what was really happening behind closed doors. Karen Carpenter was born on March 2, 1950, at 8:45 in the morning in New Haven, Connecticut. She came into the world in a modest two-bedroom home on Hall Street. Her father, Harold, earned $89 a week at a printing company. Her mother, Agnes, had given up her nursing job to raise the kids. Their life was stable, but ordinary. The spotlight, from the start, wasn't meant for Karen. It was always shining on her older brother, Richard. Richard was born 3 years earlier and had perfect pitch by the time he was 4. He could copy songs on neighbors' pianos and started composing music at 5. Agnes documented every moment of his progress like he was a prize-winning science project. But when it came to Karen, she wrote almost nothing. Agnes once said, "Karen just bangs pots and pans in the kitchen, while Richard creates beautiful music." It wasn't a joke. That's how she saw them. One was special. The other was just there. When she was 8 and tried to play music like Richard, her mother brushed it off. When her third-grade teacher suggested music lessons, Agnes replied she couldn't afford it for both kids. "Richard is the one with real talent," she wrote in a letter. When Karen begged for drum lessons after seeing Buddy Rich on TV, Agnes signed her up for ballet instead. It cost 3 times more, but she still said no to drums. In 1963, everything changed. The family moved across the country to Downey, California. They sold their house in Connecticut for $12,500 and bought a small ranch house in Downey for $13,500. Harold got a better job, raising his salary from $4,800 to $7,200 a year. But the real reason for the move was Richard. Agnes believed Los Angeles was the only place her son could truly shine. In letters to family, she wrote about Richard's future in music. Not once did she mention Karen. Karen was 13 when they arrived in Downey. She didn't fit in. Her East Coast accent made her feel even more like an outsider. At Downey High, she was quiet and unsure of herself. But that same year, something unexpected happened. She had to take a music class. She picked the glockenspiel because it looked easy. Then one day, the band's drummer quit. Karen volunteered. Within minutes of sitting behind the drums, her teacher, Bruce Gifford, realized she had something special. She had perfect rhythm. He wrote in his notes that she picked up paradiddles in 20 minutes, what took others months to learn. Karen's life turned in that moment. She wasn't just good. She was phenomenal. By Christmas, she was already playing pieces like Malaguena and Caravan. She only had 6 weeks of lessons before surpassing everyone in her class. Her school yearbook said she had revolutionized the percussion section. It was only the beginning. Still, Agnes didn't care. Richard got a $750 Baldwin piano and weekly private lessons. Karen practiced on borrowed drums and wasn't given a single penny for her music. Her diary from high school had a heartbreaking line. "Mom thinks Richard is Mozart, and I'm just noise." The imbalance in their family was obvious. Harold worked long hours and kept to himself. He never stood up for Karen. Agnes ran the house. She introduced her children to neighbors by saying, "This is my son Richard. He's going to be a famous musician. And this is Karen." That was it. It started quietly in 1965, in a small music room with no spotlight, no stage, and no plan for fame. Richard Carpenter, just 19, had a mind wired for melody. He'd been arranging jazz since his early teens, and his younger sister Karen, just 15, was already showing a rare touch on the drums. They weren't aiming for the big time, they just loved music. But when they teamed up with local bassist Wes Jacobs and called themselves the Richard Carpenter Trio, something special began to take shape. Karen wasn't singing yet. She barely spoke in public. But behind the drum kit, she came alive. She could handle time signatures like 9/8 and 11/8 without blinking, something most adult jazz drummers couldn't pull off. Her rhythms were tight and clean, but full of feeling. At first, she was just the drummer, the quiet one in the back. But everyone who saw her play remembered her. In 1966, they entered the Hollywood Bowl's Battle of the Bands and played an original jazz piece called Iced Tea. They weren't just good, they were incredible. Karen drove the beat like a pro, and Richard's arrangements were on another level. They won the competition, beating dozens of more experienced acts. RCA offered them studio time, and it felt like the door to something bigger had just opened. But then the door slammed shut. The label executives liked their talent, but not their style. Jazz was fading. Psychedelic rock was taking over. RCA told them their sound was too jazzy and walked away. The rejection hit hard. They'd done everything right, but it wasn't enough. For the first time, Karen and Richard realized that talent wasn't all that mattered. Timing was everything, and their timing, it seemed, was off. One afternoon that same year, something unexpected happened. During a casual rehearsal, Karen started singing, just for fun. It was a jazz standard, "I'll Be Seeing You." Her voice came out low, warm and smoky. Richard stopped playing. "Sing that again," he said. She did, and that was it. Everything changed. Karen had a natural 3-octave range, perfect pitch, and a tone that didn't sound like anyone else. It wasn't just good, it was stunning. Karen had no idea she could sing like that. Neither did anyone else. But Richard knew what he was hearing. He saw the future. Karen wasn't just a drummer. She was a voice the world had never heard before. Still, Karen wasn't ready to leave the drums. Between 1965 and 1967, the trio played gigs all over Southern California, at Disneyland's Tomorrowland Terrace, local colleges, weddings, backyard parties. Karen always stayed behind the kit. Even when she sang, she did it sitting down, hidden behind the cymbals. She liked it that way. She didn't want the spotlight. Not yet. People were starting to talk. Who's that girl drummer with the voice? Audiences noticed the contrast. A tiny teenager playing like Buddy Rich and singing like Dusty Springfield. But Karen didn't want to move forward. She didn't feel like a singer. In her diary, she wrote, "I'm not a singer. I'm a drummer who happens to sing." That one sentence would haunt her for years. By 1967, things started to shift. The trio broke up. RCA had passed. The jazz world didn't want them. So Richard made a decision. If jazz wasn't working, maybe pop would. He formed a new group called Spectrum. Karen joined. They focused on vocals and harmonies. But still, nobody wanted to sign them. Record labels kept saying no. Too soft, too clean, too different. Karen didn't like the new direction at first. She missed jazz. She missed her drums. But Richard believed in her voice more than she did. He started building songs around it. Simple arrangements, emotional lyrics, soft instrumentation. He slowed things down, let Karen's voice take the lead. Then they recorded a demo of Ticket to Ride, a Beatles song, but completely reimagined. Slower, sadder, deeper. Herb Alpert of A&M Records heard it. He stopped what he was doing and said, "Who is that?" Karen's voice had him hooked. A&M signed them in 1969. Karen was just 19. The day they signed the contract, April 22, 1969, was a turning point. Karen couldn't even sign it herself. Her parents had to, because she was underage. But that signature would change everything. Richard was 23. They were still just kids. But now they had a real shot. They released their first album, Offering, later retitled Ticket to Ride. It didn't top the charts, but it made people notice. Through it all, Karen kept playing drums. On those early recordings, she laid down most of the percussion herself, sometimes even the bass parts. Her drum work on All I Can Do was in 5/4 time. Not easy, but she loved it. She said, "The money's in the basement," joking about how the lower parts of her voice and her drums grounded everything. On July 25, 1970, everything changed. The Carpenters were still mostly unknown when their song, They Long to Be Close to You, hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It didn't just stay there for a week. It ruled the top spot for 4 weeks straight. That single moment flipped their world. Karen Carpenter was only 20. In just days, her voice became one of the most recognized in America. The song also topped charts in Canada and Australia. And their album, also called Close to You, reached #2 in the US and #1 in Canada. The siblings went from struggling musicians to global stars almost overnight. It wasn't just a hit, it was everywhere. The soft melody written by Burt Bacharach and Hal David, paired with Karen's warm, haunting voice, gave people something they didn't even know they needed. Radio stations couldn't stop playing it. TV shows started booking them. Advertisers called with offers. In just 15 weeks, the single stayed on the charts and helped define a new era in music. The Carpenters became the new face of soft rock. Then came their next big song, one that would stay with them forever. We've Only Just Begun had a strange start. It was originally a short jingle for a bank commercial. Paul Williams had sung it in a TV ad. But Richard Carpenter heard something more. He chased down Paul and asked for the full version. 3 months after Close to You, the Carpenters released it. It hit #2 on the Billboard Hot 100 and spent 7 weeks at #1 on the Adult Contemporary chart. It sold over 1 million copies. People loved its hopeful message. Couples started using it as their wedding song. It matched the Carpenters' image, clean, pure, and innocent, something very rare in the rebellious rock world of the 1970s. It won them a Grammy for Best New Artist and locked in their image. The label leaned into it. The soft-spoken brother-sister duo became the new gold standard in family-friendly pop. But their success wasn't just big, it was historic. In late 1970, both Close to You and We've Only Just Begun were in the top 2 slots of the Billboard charts. Few artists had ever done that. We've Only Just Begun stayed at #2 for 4 weeks, right behind the Jackson 5's I'll Be There. But both Carpenters' songs ruled the adult contemporary charts and radio stations across the country. Over the years, they would rack up 15 #1 hits in that category. Only Elton John had more. Still, all that fame came at a price. Karen, who was shy by nature, started to feel trapped. She had always preferred staying quiet, letting her voice and her drums speak for her. But with each hit, the attention grew. People wanted interviews. Magazines wanted her on the cover. She didn't like being in front of the camera. And she didn't enjoy being asked about her looks. The more she was pushed into the spotlight, the more uncomfortable she became. Her charm on stage hid her growing anxiety behind the scenes. There was pressure at home, too. Even though Karen's voice was what made the songs iconic, her mother, Agnes Carpenter, continued to treat Richard as the true star. Richard arranged the music. He made decisions. And Agnes believed he was the genius behind it all. Karen felt left out, even as her face was everywhere. It created tension. She wanted to be seen for her own talent. But she also depended on Richard to stay in the spotlight. The family needed them to work together. So Karen stayed quiet and pushed her feelings down. One of the hardest blows came when she was told to stop playing the drums. Karen loved the drums. It was where she felt safe. On stage, behind her drum kit, she didn't have to be in the center. She could just play and sing. But by 1972, that started to change. Management and even Richard said she needed to step forward, to become the front woman. She didn't want to, but the pressure was too much. Slowly, her time at the drums was taken away. She was reduced to small solos, while most of the show had her standing at the mic. She once said, "I was pushed further and further away from the drums." The move made her feel exposed and anxious. In her own words, she never wanted to be a star. She said, "I consider myself a drummer who sings." She liked sitting behind the drums and singing quietly. That's what made her happy. Even legendary drummer Hal Blaine praised her playing. Fans loved it when she drummed and sang, but those moments became rare. She was now just the face, not the drummer, not even fully the singer, just the image, and she hated it. She felt fake standing in front of the crowd, always pretending to be confident when inside. She just wanted to go back to where she felt right. Then, in 1973, something happened that changed everything again. A photograph. It showed her on stage in an outfit she thought made her look heavy. That image haunted her. From that moment on, her focus shifted. She started dieting, but not in a healthy way. She cut her meals down to almost nothing. She exercised constantly. She stopped listening to doctors. By September 1975, her weight had dropped to just 91 pounds. That's when people really began to worry. The word anorexia was almost unheard of back then. People didn't understand what they were seeing. Karen thought thinner was better. She hid food. She pretended to eat. She started using laxatives. Even small meals made her feel guilty. She didn't see the problem. But the illness was already taking hold. It began quietly, almost invisibly. And it all started with one photo and the feeling that she didn't look good enough to be in front. At the same time, Richard took more control over their music. He picked the songs. He arranged every note. He produced the albums. Karen had little say. She tried to suggest songs, to give input. But it didn't go far. The decisions were already made. Richard was a perfectionist, and their schedule was brutal. In 1973 alone, they played 174 concerts, recorded a full album, and made 3 major TV appearances. Karen worked non-stop, but still felt powerless. The Carpenters were already big stars, but between 1974 and 1976, Top of the World turned them into a global sensation. It wasn't just a chart topper. It stayed in the public's mind for decades. The song had already hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 for 2 weeks in 1973. In the UK, it sold 250,000 copies and earned a silver certification. In the US, it went gold with over 1 million sold, a massive achievement for the time. It showed up in Hollywood movies like Shrek Forever After and even on Japanese TV years later. But behind the scenes, things weren't right. Karen, always small at 5'4", looked even smaller on stage. Fans across the world noticed her weight was dropping fast. By mid-1975, her figure had changed so much, it became hard to ignore. While she sang about joy and love, her appearance told a darker story. The public began to associate her thin frame with the peak of their success. People were worried. The media started asking questions. That same year, something unexpected happened. Playboy magazine held their annual music poll. Karen, who had mostly stopped playing drums live, was still voted the 10th best drummer in the world. She even ranked above John Bonham from Led Zeppelin, who came in 11th. Bonham was furious. Industry insiders were confused. Karen, always humble, said she hoped he wasn't too upset. "I love Led Zeppelin," she said. She hadn't played drums regularly for a while, but her skill was unforgettable. Her timing, jazz touches, and musical feel stood out. It meant a lot to female musicians. A male-focused magazine had just praised a woman not only for her voice, but for her drumming. Still, the moment hurt. It reminded Karen of what she had lost, her early freedom as a musician before fame had taken over. Things reached a crisis in 1975. The Carpenters canceled their European tour without warning. The reason was clear. Karen's health was failing. Her weight had dropped to just 91 pounds. She was too weak to perform. Photos and headlines told the world something was seriously wrong. But in 1975, most people had never heard the word anorexia. Reporters didn't know how to explain what they were seeing. Fans were confused and concerned. Karen still sang beautifully on stage, but backstage, she was exhausted and often irritable. That summer, she checked into Cedars Sinai Medical Center. It was the first time her illness became public. Her family and the music world could no longer deny it. Even during this painful time, Karen kept earning praise from some of the biggest names in music. At the 1971 Grammy Awards, John Lennon told her she had one of the best voices he'd ever heard. Paul McCartney agreed. Her version of Ticket to Ride caught their attention. She had become someone even the Beatles respected. Hal Blaine and Buddy Rich, two of the greatest drummers, called her both an incredible singer and a top-notch drummer. But none of it made Karen feel better. The praise never filled the hole inside. Perfectionism and low self-worth kept her from accepting what the world already believed, that she was truly special. In late 1976, at 26 years old, Karen tried to take control. She moved out of her parents' home in Downey and bought a condo in Century City. Her mother didn't want her to leave, but Karen needed space. On the outside, it looked like a bold, adult move, but the truth was more tragic. She still visited her parents several times a week. She couldn't fully break free. Friends noticed her fridge was always empty. No milk, no bread, nothing. It was a silent sign of her illness. The move wasn't a new start. It was a cry for freedom that came too late. The emotional damage had already been done. Then, in 1979, something changed. Karen flew to New York and began working on a secret solo album. She wanted to step away from the Carpenters' soft image. She hired Phil Ramone, a top producer known for working with Paul Simon and Billy Joel. The sessions began on May 2nd at A&R Studios. Karen took charge. She picked songs, helped with arrangements, and paid for much of it herself. She sang sultry ballads, tried disco, even recorded a bluesy version of Still Crazy After All These Years. Paul Simon liked it so much, he changed a lyric just for her. This was her vision, bold, honest, and completely different from anything she had done before. When the album was done in early 1980, she shared it with friends in New York. They loved it. They were shocked by how mature and versatile she sounded. Karen was thrilled. She told friends she finally felt like herself. For once, she wasn't just Richard's little sister or the Sweet Carpenters singer. She was an artist with her own voice. She even thought about moving to New York to start fresh. There was hope that she could start over. But that dream didn't last. Back in Los Angeles, she played the album for A&M Records and her brother, Richard. Their response crushed her. Herb Alpert, one of the label's founders, called the album unreleasable. Richard, who had just come out of rehab, was furious. He saw the project as a betrayal. The label backed him. They said the songs were too mature and didn't fit the Carpenters' image. Despite all the good feedback in New York, Karen was pressured into shelving the album. She agreed, but her heart broke. Phil Ramone said she cried in front of him. It wasn't just about the music. It was about being told that her voice didn't matter unless someone else approved. Karen pretended it was a joint decision. But friends say she was devastated. She had taken a risk, fought for her independence, and lost. The depression that followed never fully lifted. She returned to work with the Carpenters, but something inside her had changed. She kept talking about the album with a mix of pride and pain. Even the day before she died, she called Ramone and said, "I still love our fucking record." The album was buried for 16 years. It finally came out in 1996. It was raw, honest, and full of what could have been. She was one of the most loved voices in America. But behind the smooth melodies and gentle smile, Karen Carpenter was drowning. In June 1980, Karen thought she had finally found peace. She met a man named Tom Burris, a 39-year-old real estate developer who seemed confident, mature, and exactly what she needed. She was famous, lonely, and tired of feeling like a product. Burris came along and made her feel seen. He wasn't just a boyfriend. He was supposed to be the one. They got engaged after just 2 months. Friends were shocked. So were her family members. He already had an 18-year-old son and a past nobody really knew about. But Karen didn't care. She had always dreamed of having a husband and kids. The wedding was set for August 31st at the Beverly Hills Hotel. It looked like a fairy tale on the outside. Then, just days before the wedding, the truth slipped out. Burris had a vasectomy years earlier. He never told her. And worse, he didn't want to reverse it. Karen was devastated. Becoming a mother was one of her deepest dreams. Now that dream was gone before the marriage even began. He said maybe he'd reverse it, but she knew that was a lie. She turned to her mother, Agnes, hoping she'd understand. But Agnes wasn't moved. The wedding was already paid for. Guests had been invited. Dresses were bought. Agnes told her, "You made your bed. Lie in it." And so Karen walked down the aisle with a broken heart, trapped between her public image and her private pain. The real nightmare began after the vows. Burris wasn't the man he claimed to be. He wasn't rich. He was drowning in debt, nearly $1 million worth. He started asking Karen for money. Not small amounts, $35,000 here, $50,000 there. He drained her savings fast. By the time Karen realized what was happening, she only had stocks and bonds left. The fortune she had earned over years of touring and recording was disappearing into his hands. But it didn't stop there. Friends started noticing the signs. Karen would show up to dinners in sunglasses at night. She looked tired, afraid, smaller. She would cry at restaurants. One friend recalled her breaking down during a meal, too scared to go home. Burris would mock her appearance. He called her a bag of bones and told her nobody would ever love her. Her eating disorder grew worse. Her joy in music faded. Her spirit began to collapse. Paramedics found her heart barely beating, just 6 times a minute. She was rushed to the hospital. At 9:51 a.m., she was gone. Weeks later, the autopsy report came out. It wasn't just anorexia. Her heart had been poisoned, literally, by emetine, the key ingredient in ipecac. She had taken so much, for so long, that it had destroyed her heart muscles. The report found nearly 0.5 microgram of the toxin in her liver. That's all it took. Her heart couldn't handle it anymore. Even in death, the truth was covered up. Her family denied the ipecac use. They insisted she hadn't been that sick, that she never purged, that her death was misunderstood. They kept documents away from reporters. Friends said her story was rewritten.